Good afternoon, Manatee Tiger Bay. Thank you, everyone, for coming. If you will take your seat, we're going to get started. We always start our programs with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if you will all please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you, and welcome, everyone. This is going to be an exciting topic today. I'm so happy you're all here. If you have a cell phone, please silence it at this time. It is very distracting to the speakers when it goes off, so I would appreciate that. We're going to start with a few announcements. We have started having a table at the entrance called the registration, right next to the registration table, and we're going to try and put information there for you to pick up that's about the topic. So please always check that table and feel free to take whatever you would like that is on that table. I'd like to acknowledge our board of directors and the speaker committee. So for those of you that are here, if you could please rise so that we can recognize you. Thank you very much. It's these people that make this program happen every month. I also want to share with you that this is the time of the year when our membership fees drop to half price. So 50% off, get your clearance membership today. You do have to be a member to ask a question. So remember, that's the exciting part about being a member of Tiger Bay, that after we hear about this topic, you will have the opportunity to address questions to our speakers. I also want to remind those of you that have people working for you or people that you know that are members of our young professionals or the thought leaders, please invite them, because we are waiving membership for those people and trying to get them more involved in this club. So please pass that word. All right, so we're going to get started. We normally go in alphabetical order, but sometimes we change that if it makes sense, and today's one of those days. So we're going to start with Kevin McNulty, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. He is the co-founder and president of NetWeave Social Networking. NetWeave was named Small Business of the Year by the Manatee Chamber of Commerce and Associate Member of the Year by the Florida Attractions Association. They provide social media services for a wide range of over 70 clients in the U.S. Kevin is followed by over 25,000 people on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. He delivers a series of social media courses for the Manatee Chamber of Commerce and has been a guest lecturer for USF, New College, St. Leo University, the Florida Attractions Association, and the Florida Aviation Business Association. His 9 years in social media give him a foundation and relevant experience regarding the business uses of social media. Kevin received his degree in psychology from California State University, Fullerton, served in the U.S. Army, and has worked for over 20 years in corporate training and communications before co-founding NetWeave in 2009. Please join me in welcoming Kevin McNulty.
Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. It's always a pleasure. As you heard in the introduction, my business is social media. So basically, I literally spend all day on Facebook, excuse me, which is good work if you can get it. But one of the things that we see in being on social media so much is the phenomenon of fake news that has become so prevalent and has really become a forefront of concern in mass communication with the last election. And a couple things are in play that make social media an important factor in this. So first of all, fake news is nothing new, right? Anybody who used to pick up the Inquirer at the check stand knows that fake news is nothing new. In fact, there's a history of publications featuring intentionally false stories that goes back all the way to the 1800s. So false news has always been kind of an entertainment for us when it comes to mass communication. However, Before social media, in order to share that kind of news, you would probably have to be in a group of people that was a relatively representative cross-section of your community. And if you said something that was outright false, someone in the room would probably call you on it. But now, with social media, we have the ability to instantly share with all our friends. And the problem with social media is that while 60% of Americans get their news from social media now, the problem is that we only get it from people primarily who think like us. Because we like people on social media, we form relationships, we send connection requests to people who are like us. And the more we do that, the more we create something that we call an echo chamber, right? Where all of a sudden, all of the discussion is all similar. There's no one in the group who really disagrees, because if they disagree too vociferously or too frequently, you just unfriend them. And so you create for yourself this little online bubble. Now, you create that online bubble in ways that you may not even realize. When you do a Google search, Google checks over 60 different variables coming out of your machine. It knows where you're asking from. It knows what kind of machine, what kind of browser. It knows the particular address of your machine, the hardware address. It also knows the IP address. And it looks at all these things. And so every time you use that machine, that browser, it verifies that. And it starts to tailor your search results based on your location, your search history, and the things that you click on out of the search history. So you're creating a bubble around yourself that you're not even aware of. So when you search for something on Google, I can search for the same exact thing, and we might see completely different results. And so this phenomenon is done by online services and websites to keep you using them, right? If you like the stuff you get rewarded for using it, and you'll keep on using it. And it's the same way with social media. They want to build a bubble around you that you enjoy being in, right? The more you enjoy using it, the longer you'll be on and the more ads they can show you. And Facebook is so good at keeping you online. The average session time on Facebook is a half an hour. And Facebook made $180 billion in ad revenue last year. And Google and Facebook combined are so good at this that Google and Facebook collect 60% of global ad revenue. I didn't say online, and I didn't say the United States. Between those two companies, they account for 60% of all advertising revenue in the world. So they're really good at building this little bubble around you. And one of my favorite sayings is that you can't do anything more important than talk to people who disagree with you. But that never happens on social media. Now, the reason that fake news is proliferating is because the business model of social media. I just told you about ads, right? Well, if I can create a website and I can get millions of clicks to come to my website, I can sell advertising space on my website for quite a bit, right? And that's what these fake news sites are doing. There's a group of young people in Macedonia, mostly 20-somethings and teenagers, that made over $3 million off the last election by producing intentionally false stories for both sides. More on one side than the other, but for both sides. They don't care. They don't care about the outcome of the election. They don't care about you having facts. All they care about is more clicks they get, more ad revenue they get. So if they can come up with an outrageous story and make it seem legitimate by naming the site something that sounds credible, by making it look credible, by using maybe one or two actual facts in a story full of misinformation, then you'll spread that around because, hey, I was the first person to hear this juicy tidbit, and I want to make sure my friends all hear this juicy tidbit, and they think the same thing, and thus all the traffic and all the money. That's one way that fake news sites proliferate. Another is more nefarious, and that's the intentional attempt to misinform a group for whatever purpose, whether it be political or, and Then there are some people who just do it because it's fun. They want to see how far around they can get a story. So, it's so easy to check, people. Snopes.com will solve 80% of your trouble. If something sounds, wow, I never knew that, or wow, that seems really amazing, 2 seconds, and you can check its veracity before you go ahead and publish it. But the other thing that social media sites do is they make it so easy to share, right? That's the whole point of the social media, is to share. So you click the little share button and all your friends get it, and it just keeps going. And I've even told people, I've seen it, and I've commented, oh, that's fake news. Here's the story debunking it. And they say, yeah, I thought maybe it was too good to be true. But then they leave the story up. So all our friends that got shared with, who are not going to see it for an hour or two, and who aren't going to read my comment because nobody reads comments, are still going to think it's true, and the person who posted it has no problem with that. The basic problem, which I know Dr. McGovern's going to talk about, is that people look for confirmation, not information, right? They want to be reinforced for their beliefs. It's something called confirmation bias. And if something reinforces your belief system, you'll go along with it. And you won't really even care if somebody can show you facts to the contrary. You may be so entrenched in this worldview, and it's such a threat to upset your worldview if you believe that it isn't true, that you just say, oh, that's big pharma, or, there's a conspiracy to put counter facts out there, but I know this is true. So it's very nefarious. It's very hard to deal with. It's easy for us to nip in the bud if we'll check our facts before we share. And so that's what I would encourage everybody to do. If you do get stories that sound a little out there, is just take 2 seconds to fact check it before you hit the share button. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I want a job where I can be on Facebook. I'm very jealous.
You say that.
So next up, we have Katie Sanders. She is deputy editor for PolitiFact. Katie helps assign fact checks and stories to a team of reporters in Washington, D.C. and St. Petersburg and Miami. She edits those stories and oversees their publication. Katie also manages the organization's Florida-centric fact-checking arm, PolitiFact Florida, which focuses on Sunshine State politicians such as Governor Rick Scott, Senators Marco Rubio and Bill Nelson, and as well as the cabinet legislators and gubernatorial candidates. Katie is a graduate of the University of Florida, where she majored in English and journalism. She works from the Tampa Bay Times headquarters in St. Petersburg. Please welcome Katie Sanders.
Thank you. It's very nice to be with you all. I appreciate being invited to tell you about what PolitiFact is doing, along with Snopes, which you mentioned, to fight this fake news epidemic. First, I want to give you just a little bit more of an idea of what goes into PolitiFact's work. Typically, we fact-check politicians or pundits or political action groups. And what we do is we'll hear a statement in a debate or a TV commercial or really any other venue nowadays, and we isolate that statement and we send our team of reporters to investigate it, to fact check it. That involves a lot of research, and it also involves a lot of typical news interviews that journalists do. So we're a small team of journalists, about 10 people. And once we've reported out how accurate this statement is, we convene what we call a star chamber, and a team of editors will rate that statement on a sliding scale of truth. Now, if the statement is perfect, it gets a true rating. If it's very far from that, or maybe just misleading, might get a half true or mostly false. If it's ridiculously wrong, it gets a pants on fire rating. That's our worst rating. You can imagine that the fake news fact checking that we do we get a lot of pants on fire ratings. So, as you said, fake news is not new. And back in the day, PolitiFact is turning 10 this August. We fact-checked a lot of chain emails. That's where you got a lot of fake news at the time. And we knew that fake news was getting in front of people, and we deemed it worthwhile to depart from our usual political fact-checking to do. But it really, it didn't hit us until the 2016 election, just how much this problem with fake news appearing on blogs or Facebook or Twitter was really becoming. As you guys will remember, the 2016 election was filled with many falsehoods that kept us very busy. And so as an assigning editor, it was partially up to me to decide, should we allocate our small amount of resources, remember we have a small team, to fact check this statement about policy, or should we do what seems obviously wrong to us because we're trained journalists, should we fact check this ridiculous sounding fake news? And more, we've been very committed to always doing the serious policy disputes over facts. But more and more, we're also committed to fact-checking fake news because we know it's very hard for people to know what is real and what isn't. So after the election, we realized that we had a huge problem on our hands, and we decided we are going to really commit to debunking things on social media. So what we did is we dedicated one reporter to this fake news beat. So this reporter's job, his name is Josh Gillen. He used to report on a lot of Florida politics, if you follow PolitiFact Florida. We dedicated Josh to scope out the worst of the worst stuff on social media. So his job was to fact check these preposterous claims. A lot of them have to do with the Clintons killing people, for instance, or certain celebrities moving to charming Florida towns like Castleberry, that Leo DiCaprio is really not moving to Castleberry. I'm just going off of recent examples, but the topics are really wide-ranging. So it's Josh's job to debunk the worst of the worst, most viral fake news checks. It's also his job to come up with ways that we can really help people tell what is fake from what is real. As you mentioned, a lot of these websites have real-sounding names. Two on my mind right now are the BostonTribune.com, that sounds real, and ABCNews.com.co. That sounds pretty real. They use the ABC logo. But these are fake news sites. They just intentionally put up stories that are completely bogus, and it's all about revenue for them. They don't care that they're leaving the public less informed than when the people found these stories. They will really just go with anything. And it's not just people from Macedonia. Josh has actually tracked down people in Clearwater and people in Maine who are also promoting their fake news stories. And they were actually, or fake news websites, and they were actually open enough to talk to him about why they started doing this in the first place. One guy had an online moniker named Busta Troll, and his motivation was to fool conservatives into serving up information that they might be inclined to believe was true, but was just something he completely made up. We laid all of this out in the Tampa Bay Times newspaper. We also developed a quiz, a 10-question quiz that you can take to kind of help people become more savvy as they see these websites like BostonTribune.com. Help them look for the signs of what is likely a fake news story. So if you go on our website, PolitiFact.com, you can find a button to this quiz, and you can compare this suspicious-looking news story against our quiz, and it'll take you through what kind of the telltale signs. Has this been reported elsewhere, being one of them. And then finally, we have developed an almanac of bad websites, known bad actors. So if you are suspicious of the website that you are looking at, and it could be a Facebook group or it could be a website that also has a Twitter presence, check out our almanac because we have hundreds of websites that we have fact-checked and that we know are fake news websites. We are seeing some improvements in this fight thanks to Facebook and Google realizing just how much power and responsibility they have for this. Google is changing their algorithms to promote fact checks over malicious content. They're not stripping away the malicious content. They say that's not their job. But they are helping us, making it easier to find fact checks, which is helpful. Helpful to us, but helpful to the public as well. And finally, we have partnered with Facebook to identify on a weekly basis the most widely shared, likely misinformation. Facebook itself does not want to be in the business of saying, this is fake news, we should delete it. Even though from my perspective, I'll speak for myself, it's pretty easy to tell who's in it for the wrong reasons. But they are also making it possible for us, once we've done the fact check, to go back after the fact and tag each suspicious post with the little flag that says disputed. So before somebody shares that, after we fact checked, it'll actually say, are you sure you want to do this? It's been disputed by PolitiFact or Snopes or a few other websites that are in this partnership as well. So we certainly can't fact check every malicious story out there. They pop up so easily every few minutes or so. But we are committed to educating the public and hopefully helping the social media platforms cut down on this huge problem. And if you guys have any ideas for how we can do that, I'm certainly ready to hear them as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Katie. Great job. PolitiFact is a great site to go to. It's my personal favorite. All right, so finally, we have the doctor to bring it all into clarity for us, Dr. James McGovern. He is a neuropsychologist in private practice. He specializes in forensic and consulting neuropsychology. He became a licensed psychologist in 1989 after completing his doctoral work at the Florida Institute of Technology and his internship at the Veterans Administration Medical Center and Vanderbilt University Hospital in Nashville. He became board certified in clinical neuropsychology, which is the study of brain behavior relationships, in 1998. Dr. McGovern is on staff at both Blake Medical Center and Manatee Memorial Hospital. He has been qualified as an expert witness in both state and federal court. His focus nowadays is on providing neuropsychological input to the courts and helping develop Blake Medical Center's new residency program. Dr. McGovern has been happily married for 36 years to his wife, Janine, who he met in South Korea, where they both served there in the Peace Corps. They have one daughter, Lauren, who currently lives and works in Santiago, Chile. Please welcome Dr. James McGovern.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope the volume is okay and the microphone's in the right place. I do have one idea on how to improve the situation, is we've got to get my mother to stop sending me these emails. It's mother, these are not true stories. This one's been around since 1986, you know. I had a very hard time preparing for this talk because I'm a neuropsychologist. I'm thinking, where do I start off? Do I start off with the lecture about the 100 billion brain cells in our brains, the tens of hundreds of trillions of connections? No, that's not going to work. How about the 186 biases that we have packed in our heads that are sort of rules of thumb that we use as we operate in the everyday world? No, that's too many. How about the 75 logical errors that people make when they're making their arguments? No, that's no good either. I need to cut to the chase. And the chase is this. I figured what I'll do is I'll offer a little piece of information, a little advice about our vulnerabilities and the ways we become susceptible to these false pieces of information, and also perhaps some ways that we can avoid being fooled by people and manipulated, if you will. I decided that most of the bad biases that we have sort of fall under the rubric of overconfidence. The fact of the matter is we need confidence. Homo sapiens needs to know that it can go out and affect the environment and make plans and have some control over the environment in order to survive. It's a survival instinct. What happens is we're born with certain presets, and one of them is that we have a basic belief that we can operate in the world in a reasonable way, and it helps us plan. Now, it's an adaptation that we have, but it also distorts reality a little bit, and one of the ways it distorts it is it produces what we call confirmation bias, which Kevin was talking about. We have a tendency to select information that sort of reinforces the way we see things. It leaves us with a better sense of control. It also provides us with some social confirmation and validation that we're operating with the right, modus operandi in life. There's also a thing that's called hindsight bias, which is the belief that we carry around with us that we also affected our past. And so that when you hear somebody say, I know I should have dumped that stock that afternoon. I knew that market was going to tank, but I had this engagement with the Tiger Bay Club and I couldn't do it. Well, the fact of the matter is he didn't know that. you don't know these things. It feels like we might have known them and that we should have done something else and we could have all acted in a different way. But in reality, there's certain things we just don't know. When you see people in Washington saying, well, he should have known or they could have known or something on that order, the fact is probably they didn't. There's a law of unintended consequences, and the world is a very complex place. But, again, these biases, what they do is they keep all of this disparate information that we have in our heads, and they keep it honed down so that we can raise the kids, go to our jobs, and just be effective in the world. Another bias we have is the belief. It's the belief that our theories and our memories are accurate. There's a lot of research on expert witness testimony. And there's all kinds of experiments that people have carried out where you ask people what their recollections of a certain event are, and then you ask them to rate their confidence in their recollections. Or there's any number of these kinds of experiments where you manipulate the information and then you ask the people whether they feel their reasoning is correct or not. The fact of the matter is when they do the analyses, there's no reliable relationship between the veracity of what you said and your confidence in it. Unconfident people are correct as often as confident people are incorrect. It just comes out in the wash. So the feeling that we're so right may not be accurate. There's other rules of thumb that we carry in our heads. The fact of the matter is we're pretty good at estimating numbers when it comes to how many kids can fit in a classroom or how much pasta do I need tomorrow night. But in large numbers, we do a terrible job. We can't truly grasp numbers like million, billion, and trillion. A good example is that, I worry about the environment, and I worry about, man's stress on the earth. So I did a little math last night, and I said, well, if people are average about 5.5 feet tall, and there's 7.5 billion of us, how long a line would that make if you lined us up head to head, or head to foot, I should say? It's 7.8 million miles. It's around the Earth 325 times. And I think about that kind of load on the Earth. And then I said, well, what if there were 7.5 billion 140-pound rabbits? What would that do to the Earth? It would decimate the Earth, and they don't even drive. There's another thing that we do is we have a tendency to latch onto the first piece of information we see, and that's why when we see the price tag that says $7.99, we see 7, not 8. I was thinking about how does that play out in the news, and son of a gun if somebody on the news didn't say something like this the other night. WXYZ has now confirmed from 3 independent sources that Mayor Jones may have cheated on his taxes. And I sat there and I said, well, why do they even bother telling me that? What you hear is confirmed. What you didn't hear is may have. There could be 59 other people that say, no, I think he did a pretty good job. Well, nobody interviewed the guy's accountant anyway. These are the kinds of things that sort of affect the way we think. They twist what we do. It's why we want to double check. It's why we want to be our own journalists. Let's be our own journalists. Let's go out, explore the facts, be fair, ask interesting questions, do a little reflection, maintain an abstract attitude, and step back and ask yourself, am I still shedding a tear because Bill O'Reilly was fired? You're in a little too deep. If you're clicking on news websites before you open your mother's email, you're probably in a little too deep. If you're thinking about buying a foam rubber brick to throw at the TV set, you're in way too deep. So the question is, how do you back off of some of these things? Psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy is based on a couple of principles that actually combat some of these biases. One of them is, don't see things in black and white. Nature is not black and white. There are not short people and tall people. There are people of a wide variety of heights, and they extend in a range, and there's a lot of in-between ones in the middle, but we have a tendency to categorize as Homo sapiens. We have to categorize, to file away, and it leads to generalizations. We're learning creatures. If you learn a lesson in one situation, you want to extend it into other situations. The second mistake we make, though, is you cannot overgeneralize. There are general principles out there, but you cannot keep using these categories and confirmatory bias to keep lumping people and things and places and arguments into certain categories. It's actually a little more complicated than that. And I think that another thing, and this is how you sell newspapers, right? If it bleeds, it leads. Don't catastrophize. If you want to understand numbers, I mean, I think we should really come to grips with the fact that the planet is 4.5 billion years old. That's a lot. That we've been around for 8,000 generations, that we are the most adaptive creatures on the planet, that we live in every environment that you can think of, that we contemplate living on other planets with environments that are so hostile that being stuck on Earth on its worst day is a little bit like being in Bradenton, Florida in 2017. It's pretty nice. And also understand, it's been going on for a million years. They used to call it propaganda. You can call it agitprop. There's all kinds of words for fake news. But I like to think about the fact that there is some wisdom that comes down to us through the ages. And one of them that I really like is I always try to keep in mind the saying that says, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And then, of course, there's the old adage, don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. Then you'll stay out of trouble. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McGovern. Excellent job. So we are now at the very exciting point of our program where we take questions and answers to our panel members. So if you are a member of Tiger Bay and you have a question, please come up to the microphone here. Tell us your name and that you're a member. And please, we ask that you refrain from any statements. We are looking for questions. And for those of you who don't know, we will have a prize available to the person who asks the most engaging questions. So get your thinking caps on, and who's going to be first today? Thank you, Rosalie Schaefer. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi. I wanted to ask the panel members, do you believe that in the schools we need to have more courses in critical thinking? It seems that the kids, especially growing up today, don't know what to believe. They don't know the questions to ask, how to look at things, and then poke it to see if it's true or not. So I'm directing it to, especially to Dr. McGovern, but anyone else who would like to comment.
Thank you, Rosalie. Who's first?
I have a few thoughts. Personally, I think that thing is absolutely critical, and I think it should extend all the way through college. I mean, I think that there's a lack of just basic instruction on critical thinking. Now, I will also tell you that these cognitive biases and these presets that we come into life with, we're stuck with them. They're there all the time. We cannot make them go away, but we can at least try to account for them. The fact is, one of the problems with the way the web and the fake news is going these days is that you've lost the voice of authority. I mean, it's gotten to the point where even the reporters, I think, they're also checking these websites. Their impetus is to stay on top of the news, right, and get the next scoop. So where are they going to get their information from? To drive out and interview somebody is going to take much longer than checking a couple of websites. So there's a lot of pollution in the whole informational system, and I think that it's really important for teachers to be that authority for information and a reliable source for the kids to learn to go to. And then, of course, the trick for a teacher is to teach the students how to be a teacher themselves.
I'll be brief. I just want to agree with your hunch that we need not only more critical thinking in schools, but an emphasis on current events and understanding current events. I think with social media, it's very easy to stay in your own cloud and your own bubble and not really feel like what's happening is relevant to you. But I think people would have a more sophisticated understanding of what truly is real if they were just paying attention to a variety of sources and had a good media diet. So I would encourage teachers to check in maybe at the beginning of class and ask people what's going on. How do you feel about it? Thanks.
I want to absolutely agree with the assertion that we need critical thinking skills, and I think part of the problem is that as a society, we value the wrong things sometimes. And as long as we value test scores over critical thinking, we're not going to get that in schools. You know, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach him to fish, he eats for the rest of his life. Critical thinking skills is how we teach kids to fish. I would rather have a kid graduating school knowing how to go find out what he wants to know than whether or not he has his times tables down. So I absolutely agree with that.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Bradley. I'm a member. I was going to probe Dr. McGovern. I was fascinated by his numbers and how hard it is to perceive big numbers. And then when he brought up those great stats about how old the Earth is and how long, I was going to ask him about the probability statistics on a person in Manatee coming across a dinosaur at some point, but we'll go another route. I read this morning that Facebook is actually meeting with a group of publishers to talk about how they could develop a subscription model to help pay for a lot of the news that, as Mr. McNulty pointed out, is consumed. As a retired journalist, what concerns me about that is that I love the fact that there's all this real news on Facebook, but if they institute that people can get for free, and I know that's a challenge for journalists, but if they put a subscription model in, I fear that what will happen is that the only news that will be left on Facebook, which is a powerful educational engine, will be fake news. And so as a journalist and as a web designer and a psychologist, I'd like to have an idea how you feel about, and certainly I believe news has value and it should be paid for in some way. I think, quite frankly, Facebook and Google ought to be paying for it and not the people who use their stuff, but I'd like to hear from you guys.
So let me start off by, I have not seen the story to which you refer, and I would love to, yeah, I would love to see it. However, there have been tons of stories revolving around the idea of Facebook is going to have a subscription, and that itself is fake news. So that could be at play here. As far as I know, Facebook has no intention to charge anybody because they're making tons of money keeping it free. The reason Facebook is worth $180 billion is not because of people's access to the product, it's because of their access to the people. They sell data about you and your browsing behaviors to the other 3 top data clearinghouses in the country, and that's how, as a Facebook advertiser, I can advertise to you on Facebook if I know you make a certain amount of money or buy a certain kind of product. Facebook doesn't know that. They're trading with these data warehouses. So, what we say in the industry is, if you're not being charged for the product, you are the product. And that's why, Facebook has made it pretty clear over and over the past 8-9 years that they have no intention of charging. So now this may be something new. I'd love to see the story, but you also want to evaluate the story that you're looking at for its own veracity.
I'm also mortified that I haven't seen this news story about Facebook engaging with publishers and possibly having a subscription model, so I'm going to look into that. But I wanted to comment about how much power Facebook has in clicks to news articles. And I can say the Tampa Bay Times watches its clicks from Facebook and how much traffic it's driving to stories very quickly. And just as soon as we think we have it figured out, we know the right formula, especially we post on Facebook from PolitiFact as well. And we see a post take off and we understand, okay, that post did great because we tagged the speaker and we found a cool photo and our headline was catchy. And we're like, great, we understand it. It takes nothing for Facebook to change what it favors, and it can change the formula without much of an explanation. So I've seen some representatives from Facebook at various conferences, and they hear these grievances from especially local publishers that don't have a national following like we do. So I hope that they are pursuing moves that support smaller newspapers and not even newspapers, but they certainly need a lot of help with sustaining their readership.
Thank you. All right.
Hi, I'm Mike Barber, and I'm a member of Tiger Bay, and I have a quick story and then a question. I was watching the Today Show a while back. Al Gore was on, and he was talking about, they asked him about global warming, and he said, evidence of it is on the news every single day. He said, just look at Florida. It's in the midst of a historic drought. And like the very next day, it started raining for like 2 weeks, and it has been raining ever since then. But so that kind of feeds into that. But my question, and maybe primarily for Katie, is in the midst of news that's ongoing, and there's this rush to get the stories out there, how do you do fact checking? And I'll give you the Russian situation is one of those. But if you go back to the situation prior to the Iraq War and the intelligence of weapons of mass destructions, how do you fact check stories like that? And so that's the general question.
Okay, well, first of all, I enjoyed your story because we did fact check that. We rated a statement from Al Gore that he said 70% of Florida is in drought today. It was on Fox News Sunday. And we rated that mostly true because it was true at the time. But our story, you could have made an argument that that should have been half true. It would have been kind of a weak argument. But the statement was accurate but needed clarification. That's our definition of mostly true. And the reason it was mostly true is because this is part of Florida's pattern. It's not entirely due to climate change. And like you mentioned, it just started raining right after he made that statement. That didn't surprise the experts that we talked to. We talked to a lot of meteorology experts. Well, so we kind of discussed that in the piece, but to keep it simple and readable and checkable, we've centered it to whether really 70% of Florida is in drought today. We didn't specifically fact check his implication that this is entirely due to climate change. It's just not. Experts, I remember from the piece, said it could be, but we haven't proven that. So he was overstating the link a little bit. But I think we did note in the piece that the drought periods are worse than is usual. So that's kind of where the correlation with climate change would be. Anyway, back to your question. I often think PolitiFact was founded in 2007. I do wonder how we would have handled, Iraq definitely has WMDs, because we don't send reporters to Iraq or we don't have that kind of budget. I think we would have actually been hesitant to read a statement like that we can't prove one way or another. We don't only write about things that we put on the Truthometer. We try to stay flexible by also writing explainer stories, and we find that those do really well when we just answer some FAQs about a topic, or we say this is the best that we know about the links between Trump and Russia, but we're not Bob Mueller. We can't say, where this is going to go. So we know our limitations, and we try to just use the Truthometer when it's a checkable fact. Thank you.
So I just want to give everybody an example. You're asking how news organizations fact check, and depending on the news organization, sometimes they don't. We manage social media for the South Florida Museum. Hi, Jessica. And a couple years ago, somebody created a Facebook page for Snooty. It was nothing the museum had ever done. Snooty's not a trademark, so we couldn't report the page for intellectual property violation or anything. So we let it be, and it was fine. They didn't really post anything. Then one day, they posted a very real-looking reading press release that Snooty had died. Now, what Katie was talking about in measuring clicks from Facebook, there is a huge reward in news to being first. If whoever reports the story first can get 8 to 10 times as many clicks as the person who reports it second or third, even if the story second or third is more accurate. That's part of the problem too, because here's what happened. Created this fake news that Snooty had died. Fox 13 picked it up and retweeted it, then picked up the phone and called Jessica. Because the reward for them being first was worth more than the time it was going to take to fact check the story. So that's an example right there of how social media has affected how news is distributed. So don't take just one source's word for it. Get corroboration from other reputable news organizations.
All right, I'm going to ask you, next time you run into a situation like that, put your psychologist hat on. There's a 2-week period of no rain in Florida. I knew it, it's global warming, confirmation bias, okay? I mean, you have to understand the people that are making the arguments to us are also victims of these different biases. They have arguments to make, sometimes they're financially involved in them. I still think that we need to go back and be our own fact checkers. I talked about the burden of mankind on the earth. and how resilient the Earth has been thus far. I decided in the global warming thing, I tell you, I was a little skeptical. I'm a scientist. You know, you're supposed to be scientifically skeptical and sort of like show me the facts. And I remember the first time, I can't remember the name of the International Commission on the planet, but when they first came out with their statement in 2005, I remember it being read on the news. It said, we are 99.9% sure that mankind has a discernible effect on the planet. Well, if you're a statistician, discernible means this much. This much. They're so confident that we have a discernible, we can tell there's something there. Well, that could be so small. I just said, what is the big to do? To bring it up to date, I decided, well, to prepare for this thing, I'm going to go back and see what their last report says. The first couple of bullet points are, mankind has an effect on the Earth. Okay? Number 2, the climate is changing. Okay? The preponderance of the effect is mankind. And I'm like, well, preponderance, I mean, if there's 2 factors at play, that means it's 51%. If there's 3 factors at play, that means 30%, or 33.3%. You know, how many factors are we talking about here? Is there 49% of this that they can't tell what's going on? Are you telling me that we're going to spend, these are just questions, are we going to spend trillions of dollars to account for 51% when indeed it may do nothing? You know, these are the kinds of things, if you don't walk through this and do some fact checking on your own, you're going to end up just getting pulled into somebody's camp because we're vulnerable to that thing, to that kind of effect.
Mr. Russell, you're next.
Well, I'm not up to date on all of the Facebook things, but I will speak for radio stations, TV stations, and newspapers. Every newspaper that I know of and TV station has a designated personnel to check the veracity of any news story that comes in. And they are absolutely mortified and sometimes penalized financially if they broadcast anything that is not true. So I will say, after working for many, many years in radio and newspaper, that we all go as far as we possibly can to make sure that a news story is accurate. And if it's not accurate, we don't run it. Thank you very much.
Any comments from the panel on that? Anybody? Okay, thank you. Yes?
Yes, I'm
please.
Eileen Graham, and I think I'm still up to date, right? Remember? Right, okay. I just am really when I heard Mr. McNutty refer to Macedonia, I had just read that George Soros has a very wonderful foundation that has gotten millions of dollars from the government, and it's in Macedonia. The Macedonian fellow, some kind of foundation. And so when we talk about that, and then we talk about fake news, how do you track to see, number one, I was delighted to hear Katie talk about how you do track and try to find out if it was true or not, but is that a group of Americans sitting in Macedonia that is making these, or how do you say it's from Macedonia? And if it is from Macedonia and you track the money thing, it's basically comes right back around to America, right? And so how as readers of the news, how do we determine if this is some group in Macedonia being funded by Soros to do the usual thing that he
think,
does?
first of all, I think you're making a leap to connect the two. Okay, lots of things happen in Macedonia, lots of things happen in the United States. Doesn't mean they're connected. But the way that they determine where these activities are taking place, in the case of a fake news website, it's pretty easy because you know who owns the servers, and you know, and you can track that back to a physical location, and you can track that back to a company. And in this case, it's not even a legal activity. They don't care if you know who they are. They're kind of proud of the fact that they made $3 million publishing crap. So it wasn't hard to find them. But this kind of thing doesn't only happen in Macedonia, right? It happens all over the world. It happens in Clearwater. So, you know, it's where it happens is not as important as that it happens. And as a reader, you don't really need to know where the story came from. You just need to figure out whether or not it's true and worth passing on.
Mr. Ben Bacher, former president and current board member.
Thank you. I think my question will be for Katie, but I will also open it up to Kevin and Dr. McGovern. Kevin, your story about Snooty and Fox 13 couldn't have teed up my question better. In a environment where everybody's racing to be first, and where especially newspapers and media outlets and media organizations have always prided themselves on being the people who hold everyone else's feet to the fire and keeps them accountable, and that's why we have newspapers and that's why we have media, to make sure we're getting the honest story. What happens now on the other side when we've got news outlets, even quoted reputable news outlets like Fox 13, being absolutely reckless with information? How the headlines are on the front page and the retractions are on the back page. What is being done to hold newspapers and media outlets and journalists to hold their feet to the fire for a lot of times what appears to be purposeful deception of the public? We realize that media outlets are there to keep these people accountable. No one seems to be holding them accountable, and what's being done for that?
So you had me until purposeful deception. In my experience, there is nobody harder on journalists when they make a mistake than journalists themselves. And it's not just the individual reporter who makes the mistake and will have their credibility questioned if they're even allowed to stay in the industry. It's the editor who missed it and didn't ask about it or didn't ask for proof. And it's a chain of editors after that. At the Times, at the Tampa Bay Times, corrections are on the front page of the section where they occurred. And I know newspapers have another policy, but I can tell you I've had some corrections, and it wasn't malicious, it wasn't intentional, it's really embarrassing. And it's mainly because you just forgot to check one last fact when you were going over your story. And it's always something you didn't think about because it's not the main point of the story. But to answer your question about who fact checks the fact checkers or who holds journalists accountable, it's up to readers. I mean, they can choose not, they have all the power. They can choose not to subscribe. They can choose to get really mad and tell all their friends and get them not to subscribe. I think readers and audiences have a lot of power. But I just want to, this might be obvious to some of you, but I just want to really hammer home that journalists, if they're in this business and they've made it for as long as they have, it's not an easy one to get into, and it's not an easy one to stay in. And they take fact collection and distribution very seriously. And at PolitiFact, you can trace all of our corrections. This isn't really the page I wanted to advertise to you all today, but we our website's very data-driven. So we have tags, and we break it down by subjects. You can look up all of our fact-checking on climate change, for instance. But we also have a topic for corrections and updates. And if we mess up, there's a serious conversation every time about how it happened. We try to do almost a forensic review. We have a lot of things on the front end that I won't go into to try to prevent as many errors as possible. But it's a human endeavor, so there's going to be mistakes. But we do have that darn corrections page, so you can go entertain yourself with our biggest bloopers.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Coming off the last, journalists get fired when they make mistakes, as evidenced by CNN last month, I believe it was, for a story that was only published on a website for less than 8 hours, I believe. They were summarily dismissed and will have a hard time getting another job. That ties to my question, and it's probably geared more towards you two. It's one thing for the media to lie, and we have various ways of trying to hold ourselves accountable, and some that can't be. But what happens when you have a government that's led by a liar-in-chief who's got a record of lying that goes back years, and it's only multiplied itself, who hires a team of flacks to stand there before cameras and do nothing but tell bold-faced lies the day after the inauguration, holding up pictures and saying, those pictures are wrong, I had more people. I mean, how does that, I mean, fake news is one thing, but how do you deal with a fake government?
Who wants to touch that one? All right.
I'll touch it. Please put on your psychologist hat. Understand that there are many dynamics that drive people's behavior. From my perspective, I still go back to taking the long view. Maybe it's because I'm in my 60s now, but the fact of the matter is I've watched the entire affair with, and the previous administration, all politicians and businesses, really. I watch with fascination, and I'm absolutely amazed at how robust our system is. I mean, it puts up with all kinds of stresses from demagogues and moneyed interests and what have you. And in my own life, what I'm trying to do is to bring it back local. A guy wrote a book years ago, and he said, if you spend all your time worrying about what's going on in Washington, you have a fundamental misunderstanding that there are people that make perfectly good salaries up there to worry about that stuff. I'm trying to bring it back locally is what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to pay attention to my family, and I'm trying to appreciate the fact that we have a robust system, and I try to concentrate on the fact that I'm in a nice room with good people like you, and I have a good friend like Dr. Jim here.
Just a little,
Please
shall we
tell
say,
us your name.
balance. I'm Dr. Jim Whitman.
And are you a member of Tiger
I am a
Bay?
member. Yes,
Thank
I
you.
am. Just a little balance. You might want to consider reading Snopes' article on the lies told about the president. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to ask our panelists, since I don't see anyone else lined up to ask questions, I'm going to ask our panelists to take just 30 seconds, please, and each of you tell us what you see for the future for our next presidential election. What do you see changing, if anything? Just give us your opinion on that, please.
Do you want to go first?
It's up to us whether or not we perpetuate fake news. So if we continue to do what we've always done, we'll continue to get what we've always gotten. It's up to you to check the veracity of a story before you spread it and to make sure that what you're passing on is accurate. We value the wrong things as a society sometimes. We need to value truth.
Well, I think fake news took us by surprise in 2016, but that won't happen again. But there are going to be even more sophisticated ways of disseminating misinformation, and we're going to be as vigilant as possible about that. But it is really on readers to become more sophisticated with the misinformation campaign, so that you have a better sense of what is the real policy positions and biographical information of your chosen candidates. So I encourage you to stay vigilant as we try to keep up with the times as well. And finally, PolitiFact has a member campaign, since you gave me a few extra seconds. You can become a member of our Truth Squad if you are really passionate about facts and politics. And you can become a member by going to politifact.com/membership. I would encourage you guys to join our Truth Squad. We have special events and all this kind of other goodies.
The future. Okay, well, I do believe that we need to check our facts. That's what I've been saying. My point is check ourselves. Don't rush off to judgment and things. I happen to view things right now the way they are, whether it's drones or the news or what have you, is sort of we're in the Wild West right now. And society is not really caught up with how to modulate these things, how to create maybe the product that I would be happy to subscribe to, where I knew the news was being filtered by some fact checkers, things like that. I think there's hope for the future. Again, the system's robust. I'm hoping that product will be developed, and that you'll get your readership and stay accurate, and not end up in the corrections page and all of that kind of thing. So anyway, it's thumbs up. That's what I think. It's a Wild West show, no doubt about it.
Excellent. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. If you'll indulge me for just one more minute as we have some closing comments. First, a very big thank you to METV for always being here, always recording our programs. If you miss a program, you can find it on YouTube and catch up with what you may have missed the month before. Members and guests, please bring your friends. If you know anyone who may be interested in this forum, we'd love to have them. And next month, we will be meeting, but it won't be here. It's going to be at the Manatee Performing Arts Center upstairs, so please put that on your calendar so you don't show up here. We will have a sign, though, if you do. And next month, we're going to be talking about the Constitution Revision Commission. Okay, so now I'm going to ask Mr. Chris Willey, one of our board members, to award the tiger by the tail to the most engaging question.
Well, it was a very difficult decision. Rosalie Schaefer asked a wonderful question, but I got awarded to Dan Bradley. It is a very, very good questions. Thank you, Dan, for participating.
All right, and so Dan, you are going to be honored with the tiger by the tail pin. Please wear it proudly, and please come back. My name is Misty Servia again, and on behalf of our board of directors, I thank you all for being here. Please join us again next month. Thank you.